So we move into video 2. We're on a roll. Hope you found video 1 helpful and you've done some homework. This first area first is heading. It's important. Collaboration and cooperation. We're talking about the degree to which different EM businesses globally and indeed in Harland cooperate with each other, collaborate. And we note one thing about this area is that Rodnim doesn't. More of that in a moment. We see that larger businesses tend not to, but smaller ones do and really have to for differing reasons. You know, bargaining power is one, position in the market. Now, it seems to me that when we think about Rodnim and the partnership and what we're told so far, control and independence are key to them. And I would say, as I've said elsewhere up front, quality is linked into that. In other words, if we have control, we control quality. That's obviously a concern for the two partners. Now, notwithstanding that, wouldn't this open the examiner up to building in a question that involves consideration of the possibility of a JV or a strategic alliance with another smaller or possibly larger entity? Absolutely. So let's make sure that we understand the different forms of alliances and or agreements that could be in play, whether or not they're in the syllabus or not. Let's be able to quote them. A JV, a strategic alliance, etc., etc., etc. Okay? Now, again, another reference to the whole competitive nature of this particular industry. The bottom line is that it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. In other words, rivalry is going to continue. Look at the revenues, look at the growth forecast, look at the profits. Moving down the page, there's a reference here to formal alliances. Again, a little bit of repetition from up top. So that certainly is a key section for us. Moving down the page into industry related risks. Now we know, looking back on basically every exam, just about, that this area of risk is important. There's a heavy focus on risk in the syllabus and therefore in the exam. What do we need to be able to do? Well, you'll see on the right hand side here, I've said a little bit down below, let's make sure that we get into the study hub and understand the definitions for all types of risk. That's first and foremost. Generally what the examiner would tend to do is come along the lines of, well, outline the risks associated with X or the above. So we need to have some in our armory outside of what we see within this particular pre-scene. Now, certainly linked into risks, the whole area of pest and indeed Porter's diamond. We'll see several references to these strategic analysis tools. Now, in terms of what we see as the key risk, nothing unusual, what you would expect. Some more relevant, I think, than others. On the outside, certainly there's a link between the EM industry and indeed a recession, economic conditions. The first things to go in a recession, whether or not it's domestically or nationally, are luxuries. And things like music conferences, etc., are luxuries. So that's a problem, but it's fairly loose. Outside of that, obviously, borrowing, cost of borrowing, etc. In addition to that, the whole area of climate change, again, fairly loose. I'd be more concerned with what we see down below. Remember also that the whole area of reputational risk and reputational damage has become more and more important in real life, and indeed it's clearly referenced within the syllabus. Companies within the EM business, or indeed any other industry, don't need reputational damage. Again, with legislation and regulation, this is likely to be signposted sometime in advance. So for me, less of a priority to perhaps what's down below in terms of operational risks. Now, I've mentioned defining different types of risk. Let's make sure that we're savvy with TARA and indeed the areas pertaining to the management of key risks. Remember, risk is all about, probability or likelihood, and impact. You know, high, low, high, low. Okay? So let's be savvy with the key elements. And also, let's look back over past SBL exams for risk style questions. You know, generally speaking, leopards don't change their spots. And if we have some knowledge of what's happened before, we'll have a broad feel of how he may examine this particular risk area. Big one for us is cyber. So operational areas. As mentioned from the outset, heavy reliance within this business and indeed the industry on IT and IS and their app. A cyber attack would be disastrous. Now, indeed, where this has been examined, more often than not, it's after the event. Maybe there's been an attack. So understand the different forms of attack and understand how a business like that might go about recovery. We know that they use an off-site outsourcer as backup, but nonetheless, they're still at risk. So, key issues in terms of risk are, as mentioned, the definitions, management, but also be ready to wheel out new definitions, other risks based on what you see on the day. Moving into the next area, tech. Now, again, a little bit like risk. We know that tech is a popular exam topic. Now, there's a caveat with that because what students tend to do sometimes is go a little bit overboard, but the examiner never does. You'll see how I've said key area for us, but, okay? And what I mean by that, you know, we simply need to understand the basics, e.g. in relation to, well, what is AI? How does it work? How might it benefit a business in this particular area? Certainly there's a shout out here to big data. We're familiar with the definitions, the 4 V's, etc., etc. So bottom line here with tech, we need to be worried about it, but it could come up in the exam. And one way of getting savvy with this area is going online, looking what EM companies are doing in this particular area. Another way to do it is to focus in on industry example section. In other words, the series of broadly 5, but probably more than 5 industry examples that I include in the course. Okay, hope this makes sense. Hope that you've enjoyed video 2. Please join me shortly for video 3 and the next section.